was a but the but wasn't really said at that point. It's just that this is something for the De La Shelf player who picked that origin, and someplace thus that it's going to serve the larger plot, the Darkspawn story. So really, I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with the idea. We just sort of sat around and talked about what we could do with this story, and settled on a theme. And I think I laid out there. The theme, we gave it a name. Nature of the Beast is just a name for the story. You give it a name because suddenly, once something has a name, it has reality. It's not even a name the player's ever going to see. They're not going to know this story is called Nature of the Beast. But it's called that because it's about the nature of nature, of beasts, which are part of nature. Nature is harsh and terrifying, but also beautiful and nurturing. Everything has two sides. And that's sort of the overarching theme I was working with. Now, breaking down the actual flow of the story. This isn't actually Nature of the Beast flowchart. This is just for one other quest. The Nature of the Beast flowchart would be much more complex. But just sort of to break it down, sort of, because I need to communicate the flow of this plot to tech design, to the artists or programmers who are going to look at it. But also, I need to sort of figure it out for myself. How is this going to break down? What is the exact path a player takes to the story? Because the important thing to keep in mind is that there are things that you do in books and movies which are easy to do in those formats, which you cannot do in a video game, and vice versa. And one of them is sort of the hand wave, right? If you do a transition in a movie, you can do the fade to black and boom, you're somewhere else. And you can do that in a game, but you have to be careful because suddenly you're taking the control away from the player. So if you get to a point where the player finishes a plot, and now you pick up the story again back at the main base, well, what happened in between? Do we just jump them? Do we force the player to jump there? Did the player have to walk back? If he's walking back, does he end up? Are there encounters along the way, or are you forcing the player to retread over ground where he just killed all the monsters and now it's just empty? I mean, pretty scenery, sure, but what kind of gameplay is that? So you have to think about that. So the flowchart will sort of help you figure out how the plot goes. Just looking at this here, the way just the formula you use. Green is sort of where the plot starts. Red would be the possible endings, the ending states. I think. I'm just going to show you the. Oh, that's not close. Oh, here it is. One of the level design docs we got, just showing you basically what was put together. Quick summary, we put this together a lot for marketing, really. And other people who want to look at it don't want to go through the whole design doc to figure out what it's about. Quick summary for them to sort of get a hold of. Then there's the longer summary. What if the player's evil? Like trying to outline some of the decisions we made. Critical path, this is the detailed version of that flow chart. Once I've got my flow chart down, I will need to sit there and start figuring out point for point what's going to happen. The color coding is there because once you start diverging the plot, you need to keep following those plot threads, right? A good trick always that we do is there's a point where you need to, where plot divergence needs to come back. You need to bottleneck it, we call it. You bring a plot back to one plot point so you can proceed forward on a single path. Now, if you could have plot divergence, those choices have effects elsewhere and change things, awesome. However, if you have plot divergence and you never bring those plot threads back together, you're going to end up with two or more distinct games plot paths being proceeding. And if you all you do if you're making choices and you're never actually thinking about where they lead, you end up with this. It would just grow exponentially, right? You would get wider and wider, and yet as much content is required. Every single path you have to do to completion. And by do to completion, I mean you have to create all the content that is required, all the dialogue for those states. If an area has changed, you need that area art to be complete. Because the player, for all the fact that all this content would be required, the player is only going to experience one path. Divergence is going to add to replayability, yes. The player comes back to that area again and thinks, well, what if I took a different decision and suddenly they got the different path? Awesome, they're gonna receive some value recognizing that divergence was possible and had some real effect. However, as a designer, you need to think about where is the balance going to be? How much divergence are you going to allow? How much resources do you have? So that's often why you'll find the sort of the big plot divergence happens near the end of the game. Knights of the Republic, for instance, there's a moment near the end of the game where you make sort of your final decision whether you're on the light side or the dark side. The reason it happens near the end of the game is because the plot at that point becomes completely different. And it has to be, because if we did it like early in the game, you'd end up with two simultaneously developed stories. And for the player who went through it the first time, they would end up, by virtue of the fact that resources are limited, they would end up with a game that's half the length of the game that we finally did make, right? And they would have like a 10, 15-hour game, and they'd be like, oh, is that it? Would they play it again? Well, maybe, I'm not saying that it couldn't work. Maybe if it was totally awesome, they would say, okay, play it again, and play that other story and think about how incredible it was. You have to think about where it's going to lie, though. So anyway, as far as the document is concerned, you're going to be figuring out where your different plots are diverging and how you're going to bring them back together, if at all. And then figuring out the cutscenes. You have to think about if you're going to have cutscenes, what exactly are they going to do? At this point, in this initial doc, the cutscene information is very limited, only because at this point we're sort of still deciding, well, do we want cutscenes? And we'll throw it to the animators. The animators will say, that would make for a very poor cutscene, or tech design might say, you're taking control away from the player here and making them do something that you could just do very easily by doing blah. Oh, all right, well, fine. And then I'll start doing the different areas. At this stage, there's still my crappy little maps that I will put together and sort of figuring out very D&D module-like what's happening at each point. Tech design is going to come in later, and we'll start figuring out exactly what encounters are going to be there. But just sort of from this initial design document, that's what's happening. All right. So now we're looking at the Dalish, exactly trying to figure out. Okay, we've got this proud people that refuse to live with humans. They're sort of gypsy-like. What's happening? How are we going to portray them? How are they going to look? So the artists are coming back and sort of showing exactly how this Dalish camp is going to be in the forest, and how the encounters I laid out in that really crappy drawing, how that's actually going to look in the game, at least. They're starting to get concepts of, okay, these are the tents that they live in. These are sort of the Aravel, which are sort of the almost like the wagons, the gypsy wagons that they ride in. How are they going to look? And that's a very cool stage when you start getting that back. All these ideas you've been throwing out, suddenly you're now starting to see exactly what they could be. I'm just going to play. This is a dialogue that happens optionally in the game for the player who's going around and trying to learn what the Dalish are about. This is something you can see.
Come and join us then, all of you. Now, what say we tell the story of the fall of the Dales? Which of you children knows that best?
I think I do.
Yes? Then come, child. Oh, don't be frightened of the outsiders. Now, where do you suppose such a tale should begin?
When we were slaves?
Yes. Long ago, our people were slaves to an empire the Shemlin had built on the darkest magic. They took away our history and our language and left us nothing. And then that empire fell. We were freed.
Because Andraste came with her army, and Shartan joined her.
Yes. Andraste, the Shemlin prophet, came out of the south.